There are names in history that fade, and there are names that echo through time. Some are remembered for their power, others for their intellect, and a rare few for the way they changed the very fabric of human existence. But among all the names, one stands out, not just because of what was said about him, but because of what he ignited in the hearts of people. His influence is undeniable, his impact is immeasurable. And yet, the question remains, why? Why is it that his story has endured when so many others have been forgotten? Why has his name sparked devotion, controversy, wars, and peace? Why is it that even now, thousands of years later, his presence is still felt in art, in music, in literature, in the very language we use? Is it because he was a teacher, a revolutionary, a prophet, or is it something more? Some say he came to bring wisdom, others say he came to challenge the status quo. But wisdom alone does not spark movements, and challenging the system does not sustain faith across generations. Many wise men have walked the earth, many have challenged the way things were, yet none have left an imprint as deep, as personal, as transformational. So again we ask, why? His words were not just teachings, they were a call to something higher. They were not meant to fill minds with knowledge, but to awaken souls to a different way of living, a way that prioritized love over power, service over status, humility over recognition. And this was radical, because in a world obsessed with gaining more, he spoke of giving it all away. In a culture that sought dominance, he demonstrated surrender. In a time where people feared rejection, he embraced the outcasts. But history is full of great teachers, philosophers who spoke of morality, leaders who called for change. Why then did his words take root so deeply? Maybe it wasn't just what he said, but how he lived. Maybe the reason his message has endured isn't just because it was spoken, but because it was demonstrated. He did not just talk about love, he embodied it. He did not just preach about sacrifice, he became it. He did not just call for transformation, he lived in a way that made it undeniable. And here's the thing about impact, it cannot be measured in a moment. True impact is revealed over time. What starts as a spark becomes a wildfire when it touches enough lives. A message may inspire for a season, but a movement lasts for generations. And his life, his influence was not just about one moment in history. It became a force that moved through centuries, shaping the very course of humanity. The question is, why did people follow? What made them leave everything behind? What gave them such conviction, such certainty, that they were willing to give their lives for what he represented? Maybe the answer is not found in doctrine or debate. Maybe it is found in the undeniable reality that something about him connected with the deepest longings of the human heart. The longing to be seen, the longing to be known, the longing to be loved without condition. Because at the core of it all, people don't just follow rules, they don't just align with principles. They follow something that speaks to their very essence. And when someone encounters something that answers their deepest why, they don't just believe, they change. And so we return to the question, why does his story still matter? Why, after all this time, are we still talking about him? Why does his name continue to stir something within us? He said, the why behind the movement expanded in 8 paragraphs and never give ending sentence. ChatGPT said, the why behind the movement. Movements don't begin with rules, they don't begin with institutions or systems. They begin with a spark, an idea so powerful that it refuses to be ignored. They begin when someone sees the world not as it is, but as it could be. And when that vision is clear enough, compelling enough, people don't just listen, they move, they change. They give up everything to be part of something bigger than themselves. But the real question is why? Why did this particular movement not only survive, but grow, thrive, and shape history itself? It wasn't because of wealth or power. This movement didn't start in palaces or among rulers. It began with fishermen, with outcasts, with the unnoticed and the unimportant. It didn't rely on armies or governments. In fact, it thrived despite opposition from the most powerful forces of its time. The movement spread not through conquest, but through conviction, not through control, but through transformation. And that kind of growth doesn't happen unless something deeper is at work. Every great movement has a message at its core. Some fight for justice, others seek freedom, but this one was different. It wasn't built on political agendas or military victories. It wasn't about gaining power, but about giving it away. It wasn't about changing laws, but about changing hearts. And that kind of revolution doesn't come from human ambition alone. It comes from something greater. Because when people encountered this message, they didn't just believe it, they became it. But movements are fragile. They require more than words to survive. They demand action, proof, something real enough to withstand time. And yet, against all odds, this movement not only endured, but expanded beyond borders, beyond cultures, beyond history itself. Something about it refused to fade. Something about it kept drawing people in, compelling them to follow, to sacrifice, to spread it no matter the cost. Some say it was the teachings, radical, countercultural, unlike anything the world had heard before. Love your enemies, serve instead of rule, forgive when it makes no sense. But words alone don't move generations. Others say it was the followers, ordinary people turned into revolutionaries, willing to face persecution and death rather than abandon what they had seen and experienced. But loyalty alone doesn't sustain a movement for thousands of years. There had to be something more. Perhaps the reason this movement spread wasn't just because of what was taught, but because of what was lived. It wasn't built on ideas, but on an undeniable presence. People didn't just hear something new, they saw something different. They saw a love that went beyond human understanding, a power that wasn't about force, but about surrender, a hope that refused to die even when everything seemed lost. And that kind of movement is unstoppable. Because movements don't grow through control, they grow through conviction. They don't spread because they have to, but because they can't be contained. And this movement, this unstoppable, unshakable force, has outlived empires, transcended cultures, and changed lives in ways history can't fully explain. It started with something so compelling that those who encountered it couldn't walk away unchanged. But why does it still move people today? Why does it still call people from every nation, every background, every walk of life? Why is it that, even in the face of opposition, this movement refuses to fade? You said, the radical approach expanded in 8 paragraphs and never give ending sentence. ChatGPT said, the radical approach. Change is never comfortable. It disrupts, it unsettles, it forces people to see the world differently. And history has seen its share of disruptors, leaders, revolutionaries, thinkers who challenge the status quo. But ever so often, someone comes along who doesn't just challenge the system, but completely rewrites the rules. Someone whose words and actions are so countercultural, so unexpected, that people don't know whether to follow or to fear them. And that's exactly what happened. In a world where power meant dominance, he spoke of servanthood. In a culture where worth was measured by status, he lifted up the lowly. In a time where justice meant revenge, he preached forgiveness. Everything about his message turned conventional wisdom upside down. He didn't just talk about love, he loved the unlovable. He didn't just preach about grace, he extended it to the ones society had cast aside. And that kind of approach wasn't just different, it was radical. People expected a leader who would conquer, but he refused to fight. They wanted a ruler who would overthrow the oppressors, but he chose to surrender. They anticipated someone who would take a throne, but instead he took a cross. And that didn't make sense, because in every other movement, in every other revolution, victory was defined by power, by control, by winning. But he introduced an entirely new kind of victory, one that didn't come through force, but through sacrifice. And that's what made him dangerous. Not because he raised an army, but because he raised a question. What if power isn't about control? What if true greatness isn't about being served, but about serving? What if the way to win is to let go? Ideas like that don't just challenge the system, they threaten it. And those in power knew it, because a kingdom built on fear can be maintained. A kingdom built on love cannot be contained. But a radical message means nothing if it isn't lived out, and that's what set him apart. He didn't just say these things, he embodied them. He didn't just teach about humility, he washed the feet of those who followed him. He didn't just speak about loving enemies, he forgave the very people who betrayed him. He didn't just tell others to give, he gave everything, even his life. And that's the kind of leadership that doesn't just inspire, it transforms. Because people don't follow words, they follow authenticity, they follow something real. And when they saw him, when they watched the way he lived, the way he loved, the way he gave everything for others, they saw something they had never seen before, a kind of love that wasn't transactional, a kind of grace that wasn't earned, a kind of truth that wasn't just spoken but was lived. And that was the difference. It's easy to admire a great teacher, it's easy to respect a wise philosopher, but it's nearly impossible to ignore someone who completely redefines what it means to lead, to love, to live. And That's why this wasn't just another movement, another moment in history. This was something different, something that didn't fit into any existing framework, something so radical, so upside down, that it forced people to rethink everything they thought they knew. And the question is, what do you do with a message like that? What happens when you encounter something so unexpected, so challenging, that it demands a response? Because a radical approach isn't meant to be observed, it's meant to be experienced.